Welcome to the debate, Weaponized Love, Reclaiming Sanity from Emotional War. Today, we analyze the ideas from the book The Invisible Chains 2.
It is a heavy title for a heavy subject. We are not talking about relationship advice for couples who argue about, who takes out the trash. We're looking at a survival guide for people who feel trapped in relationships defined by emotional blackmail, gaslighting, and covert manipulation.
Exactly. The source material, authored by Angel Gabriel, it presents a central premise that's both terrifying and really empowering, that the confusion you feel in a relationship is rarely accidental. It argues that the fog victims feel, that suffocating mix of fear, obligation, and guilt, is a constructed environment. It's a cage built by design to keep you compliant.
And, well, that's where the stakes get very high, very quickly. This isn't just about being unhappy. The material describes something called the silent scar, the toll on mental health that includes chronic anxiety, the erosion of identity, and a complete loss of trust in one's own perception. We're talking about the physiology of living in a war zone inside your own home.
It's a battle for sanity. My position today is that the rigorous, almost militant frameworks proposed in this material are absolutely essential. When you're drowning in manipulation, you don't need nuance. You need a lifeline. You need to name the tactics, document the reality, and build a fortress around your mind.
See, and I come at it from a different way. I agree that manipulation is real and destructive, of course. However, I worry that the methodology proposed here, specifically the hypervigilance required to, quote, document every interaction and test reality, might actually deepen the obsession with the relationship rather than curing it. There's a fine line between awareness and paranoia, and I want to see if this material crosses it.
A fair challenge. So let's get into the positions. You're skeptical of the cure. Walk me through that.
Sure. My concern, it lies in the practical application of these diagnostics. The material asks us to become detectives in our own homes. It suggests we shouldn't just feel hurt. We should be categorizing that hurt as covert tactics. While the diagnosis of manipulation is valid, the proposed solutions feel incredibly clinical for an intimate relationship. If I have to keep a private journal of incidents just to survive dinner with my spouse, have I really reclaimed my sanity? Or have I just, institutionalized my misery? I argue that viewing every sigh, every silence, or every forgotten errand as a calculated move, well, it risks turning the listener into a conspiracy theorist. It potentially escalates conflict where it might be resolved with simple communication.
I see why you'd think that, but let me give you a different perspective. You are looking at these tools through the lens of a healthy relationship. In a healthy dynamic, you don't need a journal to prove you aren't crazy. But this material is for people deep in the fog, the fear, obligation, and guilt. My view is that clarity is the only antidote. The methodology, specifically naming tactics like gaslighting or the silent treatment or passive aggression, it's not about paranoia. It is about reality testing. Without these rigid frameworks, the victim continues to doubt their own sanity. They think, maybe I am too sensitive, or maybe I did forget that conversation. The book's radical approach to boundaries and documentation is the only way to break a cycle that relies on the victim's empathy to survive. You call it clinical, I call it necessary triage.
Okay, then let's test that triage. Let's move into the core debate, starting with the diagnostics. The material presents this concept of the fog trinity and the puppet master's playbook. It lists covert tactics like withholding affection, passive aggression, and the silent treatment.
Correct, and it frames them as deliberate choices.
That is exactly where I struggle. The self-assessment approach teaches people to interpret behaviors like forgetfulness or moodiness as withholding or feigned ignorance. I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that it's always that black and white. Let me tell you why. Humans are messy. We get tired. We forget things. We get grumpy and go quiet. If I teach a listener that their partner's bad mood is actually a calculated withdrawal of connection, aren't I creating a hostile mindset? Is it realistic to claim these are always choices designed to control rather than just human flaws?
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. The material actually addresses this distinction by focusing on patterns and intent. It introduces the concept of the good guy gaslighter and the glamour gaslighter. These aren't people who just have a bad day. These are individuals where the behavior consistently results in their gain at the victim's expense.
But how does the victim know the difference in the heat of the moment? If my partner forgets my birthday, how do I know if it's feigned ignorance or just them being, scatterbrained?
By looking at the outcome. The material argues that if the forgetfulness always allows the partner to escape accountability, or if the silence always forces the victim to apologize just to break the tension, it's a tactic. You asked if it's realistic to claim these are choices. I argue yes. The key differentiator is that when you confront a normal person about hurting you, they take responsibility. When you confront a manipulator, they shift the blame. Without a rigorous diagnostic framework, the victim falls for the "I didn't mean it" excuse every single time. The rigorous labeling is necessary to see the invisible chains.
I can concede that the pattern recognition is valuable, but let's look at how the material asks the victim to view themselves. This brings us to the gaslight tango. This is the theory that a victim's best qualities, empathy, the desire to fix things, the fear of abandonment, are the very levers used against them.
It's a profound concept. It explains why smart, capable people stay.
It explains it, yes, but I question the danger of this framing. The material essentially tells the victim, you are a participant in this tango because of your empathy. Does that not suggest they're responsible for the abuse? It seems to risk making the listener feel guilty for being a good person. It's saying, your desire to help is actually your weakness. That feels like a double bind. You're abused because you're nice, so the solution is what? Stop being nice?
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because it confuses responsibility with strategy. The material isn't assigning blame, it's assigning agency. This is arguably the most transformative idea in the text. By realizing that their desire to fix is a liability in this specific dynamic, the listener can stop feeding the beast. It reframes empathy not as a weakness to be ashamed of, but as a resource that needs to be protected.
But it requires a person to suppress their natural instinct to connect. That feels like, spiritual suicide.
In the short term, yes. The gaslight tango shows that you cannot empathize your way out of manipulation. If you're dancing with someone who steps on your feet every time you move closer, the solution isn't to dance better, it's to stop dancing. It's about realizing that your history of trauma or your desire to fix are being weaponized. It's not victim blaming, it's giving the victim the schematics of the trap so they can dismantle it.
That sounds empowering in theory, but let's look at the practical application. This leads us to the methodology of escape, reality testing, gray rock, and disconnection.
The practical toolkit, right.
The reality testing advice is where I really get skeptical. The material suggests keeping a private journal of incidents to record dates, times, and quotes, and then cross-referencing with a third party. This sounds like preparing for a high-stakes lawsuit, not healing a relationship. If I have to write down what you said at 8 p.m. on Tuesday to prove you're gaslighting me, is there any relationship left to save?
See, you're assuming the goal is to save the relationship. The goal of reality testing is to save the self. When you are being gaslit, your memory is under attack. The manipulator says that never happened, or you're imagining things. In that environment, the journal is the only objective truth. It's the anchor.
But doesn't that constant documentation keep you focused on the abuser? You're spending your day writing about them, thinking about them, analyzing their words. You aren't living your life. You are studying theirs.
You are focusing on the facts rather than the fog. The material is clear. Gaslighting creates cognitive dissonance. You feel one way, but are told another. The journal bridges that gap. It validates that the whispers of unease are real. You say it keeps you focused on them, but I argue it breaks the spell. Once you see the pattern written down in black and white, every time I succeed at work, he starts a fight. You can't unsee it.
Okay. Let's say I accept the journal as a temporary measure. What about the advice on low contact? The material suggests treating a family member or partner like a business transaction. Strictly transactional communication, no emotion, using intermediaries. Is that sustainable? Can you truly live a life where you treat your mother or your co-parent like a hostile vendor?
It is sustainable if the alternative is emotional destruction. The material presents low contact and the gray rock, becoming uninteresting and unresponsive. as a necessary triage state. It's not about being cold, it's about being safe.
But the material talks about rebuilding a sanctuary. That's the ultimate goal, right? To heal and thrive. My question is, can you truly build a sanctuary while you are still engaging in these low-contact games? It feels like you're building a sanctuary in a war zone. I wonder if no contact is the only honest advice, and if low contact just prolongs the pain by keeping the door slightly ajar.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the constraints of reality? The material explicitly differentiates between the two. No contact is the ideal for severe cases, but what about co-parenting? What about shared assets? The low-contact strategy is for when you can't walk away entirely.
But does it work, or does it just make the manipulator angrier?
It works by removing the supply. The manipulator feeds on emotional reaction, fear, obligation, guilt. By becoming transactional, you starve the dynamic. The sanctuary isn't just a physical place, it's a mental state where their chaos can no longer touch you. I would argue that drawing the line and enforcing these strict boundaries is an act of self-love, even if it causes conflict. In fact, the material warns that it will cause conflict. The manipulator will escalate, but that escalation is just further proof that the boundary was necessary.
I suppose that is the crux of it, the escalation. The material warns that when you set a boundary, saying, I will not lend you money or I will not be yelled at, the manipulator will switch to victim playing or aggressive shifting blame.
Exactly. It calls this the extinction urst, like a toddler throwing a tantrum when you stop giving them candy.
But this is where the strategy gets incredibly taxing. You have to anticipate their moves. You have to know that if you go gray rock, they might try hoovering, sucking you back in with sweetness.
Yes. Hoovering is a critical concept.
But think about what that does to a person's ability to trust. The book frames even kindness as a weapon. If they are mean, it's abuse. If they are nice, it's a hoovering tactic. This creates a worldview where trust is impossible. If I follow this guide, I can never accept an apology or a bouquet of flowers again without analyzing the tactical intent behind it. That sounds like a very lonely way to live.
It is lonely, but only temporarily. Trust must be earned, not assumed. The material argues that in these specific dynamics, kindness is often just part of the cycle of abuse, the honeymoon phase used to reset the victim's tolerance. The rigorous analysis, the skepticism you call lonely, is necessary because the victim's natural baseline is to trust too easily. The book isn't saying never trust anyone. It's saying verify the change. Real change involves accountability. Hoovering involves flowers and tears, but no change in behavior.
So the journal helps you spot the difference. You look at the data. Last time you brought flowers, he screamed at me 2 days later.
Exactly. The data protects you when your heart wants to cave in.
I want to circle back to one of the covert tactics mentioned, the silent treatment versus just needing space. We touched on this, but the material is very specific about this being a punishment.
Yes. It's about intent.
But again, how do we prove intent without becoming mind readers? The skeptic in me says that assuming malice is a dangerous way to live.
I agree that assuming malice is dangerous in a healthy context, but we're analyzing the invisible chains. The premise is that the chain is already there. The silent treatment described in the book isn't someone taking an hour to cool off. It is days of ignoring someone's existence to force capitulation. It is a psychological isolation chamber. My stance is that we must stop giving the benefit of the doubt to behavior that is consistently cruel. If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. If it hurts like abuse and controls like abuse, it's abuse.
And that brings us to the silent scar. We haven't touched enough on the physical toll. The material mentions chronic headaches, digestive issues, and a pervasive sense of dread.
It's the body keeping the score.
Right. And this is where I actually find myself agreeing with the no-contact approach more than the low contact. If your body is physically rejecting the relationship, if you are sick with worry, is managing the relationship via boundaries really enough? Can you gray rock away a migraine caused by stress?
For some, no. The material is honest about that. It says no contact is the swiftest route to healing. But it also acknowledges the difficulty. It talks about the trauma bond.
the chemical addiction to the highs and lows of the relationship. That's why the reality testing is crucial even after you leave. You need the journal to remind you why you left when they show up with promises of change.
It's a grim picture, isn't it? The idea that love can be weaponized so effectively that you need a dossier to escape it.
Grim but hopeful, because the invisible chains are only invisible until you shine a light on them. Once you see the mechanism, the fog, the gaslighting, the tango, you can't unsee it. And that is the beginning of freedom.
We are coming to the end of our analysis. Let's summarize our positions on this survival guide.
I stand by the effectiveness of this material. For those feeling the whispers of unease, this methodology is a lifeline. It validates that they aren't crazy, that the confusion is manufactured. The rigor of naming the tactics and the strictness of the boundaries are not optional. They are the structural supports needed to rebuild a collapsed self. The discomfort of setting those boundaries is simply the price of admission for freedom.
And I will maintain a degree of caution. I acknowledge the book provides a powerful vocabulary for identifying abuse. Fog and gaslighting are essential concepts. However, I warn listeners against applying these rigid templates to every friction in life. Not every forgetful partner is a covert manipulator, and not every argument is gaslighting. These methods, especially the journaling of evidence and transactional communication, are a nuclear option. They're effective, yes, but they should be reserved for severe cases, not everyday relationship struggles.
So final verdict, is this a must-try approach?
I suggest approaching the disconnection strategies with careful planning and probably professional support rather than as an immediate reaction. But the self-assessment, yes, take the test, see where you land.
Yuamate.
I will maintain a degree of caution. I acknowledge the book provides a powerful vocabulary for identifying abuse. Fog and gaslighting are essential concepts. However, I warn listeners against applying these rigid templates to every friction in life. Not every forgetful partner is a covert manipulator, and not every argument is gaslighting. These methods, especially the journaling of evidence and transactional communication, are a nuclear option. They're effective, yes, but they should be reserved for severe cases, not everyday relationship struggles.
So final verdict, is this a must-try approach?
I suggest approaching the disconnection strategies with careful planning and probably professional support rather than as an immediate reaction. But the self-assessment, yes. Take the test, see where you land. I will maintain a degree of caution. I acknowledge the book provides a powerful vocabulary for identifying abuse. Fog and gaslighting are essential concepts. However, I warn listeners against applying these rigid templates to every friction in life. Not every forgetful partner is a covert manipulator, and not every argument is gaslighting. These methods, especially the journaling of evidence and transactional communication, are a nuclear option. They're effective, yes, but they should be reserved for severe cases, not everyday relationship struggles.
So final verdict, is this a must-try approach?
I suggest approaching the disconnection strategies with careful planning and probably professional support rather than as an immediate reaction. But the self-assessment, yes. Take the test, see where you land.
And I vote yes for the reality testing immediately. If you are doubting your memory, write it down. Today, it's the only way to anchor yourself.
It seems we agree that the chains exist, even if we disagree on the best way to cut them.
Whether you are ready to pick up the journal or just ready to ask the question, is this normal? The important thing is that you are asking. Breaking the invisible chains starts with the realization that you are wearing them.
And facing the silence that comes after might be scary, but it's likely better than the noise of the war.
That's all for today. Join us next time on The Debate.